So for the first step of our build here, we've determined that we are going to use the 6-inch suction cup on the side of the vehicle. There's a little bit of a curvature to the side of the vehicle, and so we can't use the 10-inch. So the next size down is the 6, so that's what we're going to use. So at this point, you need to figure out, what are you going to use the suction cup for, and what's the attachment device that you're going to use, the rigging device. So in this case, I need essentially a piece of speed rail to come off of it. So of course, with our whole system, you have a lot of options. So the first option is to use a grenade starter, and you basically just bolt the starter to the 6-inch suction cup. And to get the bolt in there, basically you have to take the top off to get the bolt in there. We might offer starters with a piece of thread sticking out, in which case you don't have to unbolt anything. You just thread this on. You just have to be careful with the threading on of the grenades, and because if you're using that starter to rotate, you can essentially unscrew your starter depending on how you're rigging. So that's actually kind of why I don't like the grenade system, but a lot of people like it for its speed. The other downside is just it's a 5 or 6-inch piece of starter speed rail, or it's just like a starter tube. And so by using our modular speed rail starter system, you could use any length tube you want, but most importantly, it's not going to twist or rotate on you and unscrew itself. So for today's demonstration, I'm going to use our modular speed rail starter because if I can avoid it, I try to avoid the grenades. It's an inexpensive, quick solution, but I feel like our modular speed rail starter is a much better solution, much more secure, gives me more peace of mind. And most importantly, later when you see this whole rig finished, because you can essentially attach any length speed rail you want on this starter, you can essentially slide the camera left and right by having a longer piece of tube on here. So anyways, it can give you some adjustability. But to get the modular speed rail starter onto the 6-inch suction cup, it's really easy. It'll come with these countersunk 1/4-20s, and there are 4 mounting points down at the bottom. For the 10-inch suction cup, you can get all 4 bolts in. For the 4.5 and the 6-inch suction cup, you can only get 2 bolts in there at the same time. And so basically you just line up the holes. You take your countersunk 1/4-20 screw, and the first one's real easy. You just line it up, and I'll actually just hold the screw in and spin the starter. There we go, it's started. And I'm just gonna spin this on here real quick, because the only way to get under there is with an Allen wrench. So, and you can only do like a half turn at a time. So it just, takes up some time. And unfortunately, you can't do this by taking off the plate, because then you can't get the mounting screws back on. So there we go. We got that threaded in most of the way. So we'll take our second one here and directly the opposite side, and I'll push it through, and then I'll just rotate the starter until it falls in. And there we have it. Now this one I'll do by hand, because it's, should be fairly easy to get threaded in by hand. And I'll take it as far as it'll go, because it's just much faster that way. And then I'll take the Allen tool wrench, and there you go. We're ready and I'll get it nice and tight. And now I'll do the other bolt. And so you might say, what about the other ones? Honestly, 2 1/4-20s are plenty strength for most applications. Remember, the starter, you're only using a single 3/8. So this is actually spreading the load off to different points. So, it's pretty good. So there you have it. There we got our 6-inch suction cup with the speed rail coming right off of it. So in this case, we're mounting the suction cup on a vertical surface, the side of the vehicle, and we're going to want a tube going, a speed rail tube going up. So what we can do is we can use our Houdini clamp in a 90-degree configuration to now get a speed rail tube going vertically. Now, as opposed to doing this, the other option, which you actually wouldn't even need a speed rail starter for, which we could have done, and just another option is by taking the female side of the Houdini clamp and bolting that straight to the cheese plate on the suction cup and going straight up from that. So I'm actually going to do that because so there's a lot of considerations, like why would you pick one over the other, right? I already mentioned that with the grenade, you only have a short length, and the fact that it's bolted in, it doesn't have its own thread, and even if we did have a thread in here, the tendency is if you can tighten, once you get this gripped, if things move, it's actually unscrewing itself. So I actually don't like that solution very much. I mean, of course, you can tighten that bolt very strongly so that probably won't slip, but the fact that it can slip, I'm not a huge fan of. So with our modular speed rail starter, there is no slip of that. So that's good. The advantage of using the speed rail starter is because you can get the speed rail tube in here. And like I said, if you have the vertical here and all of a sudden you want to slide the vertical in and out and adjust that vertical tube, you can do that. But if we know we're not going to be moving this tube, then actually what we want to do is we want to decrease the distance at where this tube is meeting as much as possible, because essentially you're leveraging, right? The further out you go, the more leverage you're applying, and you may unstick or come undone here with your suction cup, or you just be applying a lot of pressure. So obviously, the further in you can mount this, the better. So that's actually how I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna use the female side of the Houdini clamp to get a vertical tube coming straight up from our suction cup. With the 6-inch suction cup and the female Houdini, we can put a bolt through the center and go 3/8 16 bolt, and we can get it started here. And I'm spinning it because that's actually the easiest, quickest way to do it. And then now we can take a wrench, get it in there, and get this really tight. And then so in this situation, we can get a piece of speed rail going straight off the suction cup close to the mounting surface, which is what how we're gonna mount it right now. We're now at the point where we're gonna attach the suction cup to the side of the vehicle. Now, this is just my old beat up race car. You see it's all scratched up. I'm not so worried about the paint on this car, but if you were, and most of the times you are, because you're not, even if you are using your car, you would care about the paint. One of the things a lot of people do is they use clear cling film. First they clean it off, and then they use either cling film or like clear contact paper. There's actually quite a few products that people use that are removable, that don't damage the paint and protect the paint. So if you have a classic vehicle, this is the kind of thing you're going to want to do. In this case, like I said, it's just my beat up race car paint. And so we will, of course, as always, want to clean this off. So, and the reason we do that is, once again, because we want to make sure that the suction cup has the best possible mirror surface to do its job. So once we got that clean, I will always orient the pump with the red line in a position where I can access it and I can always see. So you wouldn't want to put it down because it's hard to see if the red line is being exposed. And so, as always, I press in on it a little bit and I start pumping, and now the red line is gone. And I give it a couple extra pumps. I already have the clamp a little loose, So I'm going to grab my speed rail. And you know, as you may have heard, CineMilled is selling black anodized speed rail now. You can get it from us. Of course, you get your speed rail from any source. A lot of times, you know, for this car mounting, it's not super critical, but you know, if you're doing the camera car, it's nice to have all blacked out tubes so they don't reflect on anything. And so I'm going to get this close to where I want it. I'm going to tighten a little bit on each side so I have an even pressure on the clamp. There we go. Okay. Now, you might notice it's moving around some. And as always, you're never just going to do one suction cup. You're going to do a whole series of them and a whole bunch of mounts. So right off the bat, I mean, you know, this is fairly strong. You can see the side to side is holding very well, but you can't just rely on one, obviously. So you do have to use as many as possible. And once you'll see when we're finished and we have the whole structure in place, you'll be able to grab this and, you know, the whole car will move because the whole thing becomes the structure itself, not just one tube. So, of course, as always, we can do our safety straps. Once again, wait till the end to do this, but as you can see here, you can choose where, you know, it depends on which direction you're going to strap to. On this vehicle, we're going to have some strap points on the bottom. And so there you go. And we'll be able to strap it down to a mounting point on the bottom of the chassis. And of course, we're not just going to pull in one direction. We're going to have another one over here, possibly one going in the other direction. So, you know, this is just a final safety. Once again, it's not something we're going to do at this point, but it is something we're going to do probably at the end. But, you know, that's pretty much all you have to worry about with these section cups. They're very straightforward. You just want to keep an eye on the plunger, on the suction pump right here. Over time, maybe after lunch or something like this, air can escape and you could lose suction. So like before every take or whenever you remember to do that, just come over, give it a couple pumps, make sure it's doing the job it's supposed to be doing. So let's start to connect the left side of the car to the right side of the car and continue to build our structure. And so connecting different mounting points is what starts to give us our rig some structure and some rigidity. So we set this up on the other side with the same 6-inch suction cup and a vertical tube, and now we ran this horizontal speed rail right here. And this is where we use our Houdini, our fixed Houdini clamps. And so as you can see here, they come apart. There's a female side and a male side. The female side we use down on here and use the threads to go into the base plate of the suction cup. But in this case, we're going to use it as a cheese burro, or as some people call them, handcuffs, as we say in Brazil, actually. And so what we're going to do is you can select a different number of angles right there. And in this case, obviously, we're using a full 90-degree angle. And that's what we did. We left the clamps here a little loose, and we can start to slide our speed rail tube through. There we go. And we're going to want to tighten each side evenly. And once again, our Houdini clamps, they follow the curvature of the tube very closely. So they apply a nice even pressure, which gives the clamp much more holding power than a traditional clamshell style speed rail clamp, because those clamps are made to fit a multitude of tube sizes. And we know that most of the time we're going to be using the 1 1/4 size. And so Now, before we tighten the bottom, we do want to make sure, that we have this. I have a level off screen here, and we're going to slide this up and down until we have it nice and level. And now we're going to tighten this guy up a little bit on each side, as always, and get it nice and tight. I really like these T-handle wrenches myself. So now you're going to notice if you remember me tugging on this before we attached it to the other side, now this is really stiff. It really starts to gain a lot of structure and a lot of strength. Obviously, I don't have any tubes going forward. So right now, back and forth, it's moving. But it's not moving side to side anymore. I'm pretty much moving the car at this point. It's very rigid. And so this is the traditional triangulation point, where now we need to add an angle, attach it to another point to give it both a forward rigidity and a diagonal rigidity, right? So, but the one last thing I want to talk about is our access hole here that we have for the clamp. As an additional safety measure that, it's not really required, but if you want to take the time to do this, it's certainly not going to hurt anything. We do have an optional set screw that you can use. And so this is very familiar to you, a lot of you that use the Hollander fittings. That's actually the main securing method of the Hollander fittings. In our clamp, it's just a backup. It's just, you being paranoid, essentially. The reason why, because our clamp has the full contact point, these aren't really necessary because our clamp applies a lot more pressure to the tube. The other reason why you may not want to use these is if you're using our CineMilled black anodized tubing, you'll notice that when you use the set screws, they dig into the tubing, and soon this will start looking like it has chicken pox. And so, if you have nice black tubing and you don't really want to ruin it, I would say this is not really necessary. But, if you want to just be ultra cautious, you could run the safety set screw, but it's not necessary. All right, so here we are. We are getting ready to rig our triangulation point on our structure that we're building here on the back of this vehicle, back of the race car. And since we have a great piece of glass here, we're going to absolutely use that as much as we can. We want to use the back window of vehicles because a lot of times the rear window is bonded in, it's glued in. It's sometimes on a lot of vehicles, it's part of the structural component of the vehicle. So it is a great surface. A lot of times roofs are not so good because they are not a structural component. They're also a lot of times very thin. The whole roof will move. So the window is actually a much better preferred area to mount the 10-inch suction cup. So basically, we're just going to stick this on here. Obviously, they come with this shower cap, our Woods Power Grip suction base. And so we're going to take that off. And as always, the first thing we want to do is we want to clean this surface. And so we're going to use our window cleaner here and get this surface nice and clean. And let's do that. All right. Now that we have that clean, once again, here's the plunger with the red line. I am going to angle that up so that it's easily accessible and easy to read when I walk by and I want to see where I'm at with the suction on here. And so there's a pressure release valve on this side. So that's how you would take it off. But basically I like to apply a little bit of pressure, get it squatted in, and then start pumping away. And because this is the 10-inch pad for curved surfaces, there's a lot of volume in there. So it takes quite a few pumps, but you're gonna wanna keep going until you no longer see the red line, and there we go. So now this is totally squatted down, and as you can see, we can shake the whole vehicle, and this is barely moving. So once again, this is a fantastic anchor point for you to really sort of stabilize the rest of your structure. So as you can see here, what we did is we're using our modular speed rail starter, and we put that in the center. Once again, you can put these modular speed rail starters on either side of these ears. So this is probably a good point to talk about, like why you would want to use the speed rail starter on the ear. So the nice thing about these ears is that they're only like half an inch to an inch away from the mounting surface. So way up here we have a lot of leverage at play, and there's a little bit of movement because of course this is a rubber base. So by mounting this modular speed rail starter down here, you have less leverage, and it provides a much stronger sort of triangulation point. I would say though, the other reason to use the ears is that, so here's a tube. So what we're actually going to get ready to do here is we're going to go from here to the other vertical riser right there. And this is going to provide us fore and aft triangulation to stop the fore and aft movement of the structure. The other thing though is if time allows, what you're always going to want to do is kind of run more than one tube, especially if you have a very strong anchor point like we have here. So probably what I'm going to want to do is also run one from here straight down to the long horizontal tube. So that means I do have enough room here for, you know, at least 2 of our clamps. And so I could stack them. But the other thing we can do is I could leave this upper vertical for the side triangulation, and then put either a grenade or our modular speed rail starter down here and use this side one. Instead of trying to get this getting crowded and putting even more forces on this high leverage attachment point, you could put it on the side and buy you some room. So in fact, that's actually what we're going to do, because I think that's a really good idea. And then of course this can serve as another attachment point if you're going to continue to build the structure above on the roof. And so, you know, these are not very much talked about, but they are very useful, very important, because it allows you to go away with more tubes. So you either add a longer piece of speed rail so that you can fit more clamps here so you can go to different places, or you can actually start using the ones on the sides. So now one of the things you don't want to forget is this modular speed rail starter. It also mounts, it does allow you to put 2 pieces of speed rail right here. And so you can also use it for that situation. But honestly, down here is a much better option. And to get the modular speed rail starter on there, basically here's another one that's empty. We leave plenty of room in between the 2 levels here for you to get a wrench in there, for you to put the bolt in there. Worst case scenario, if you need access, you can always just remove these 4 bolts, take the plate off, get your bolts put in, tighten them down, and then put this back on. So you have a couple options there on what you can do. But basically, this is really straightforward. You know, we got the side mounting ears that you can put the speed rail starter, or you can use the grenades here on the side. Or, you know, you can use baby pins also, and then use a gobo head and go off and, you know, maybe triangulate something else. The other feature I want to talk about on the upper cheese plate here is the safety strap loops. So there's 4 positions on the 10-inch suction cup. And, you know, this is really simple to grasp. You can just pass your ratchet strap right through it and attach it to someplace on the vehicle. You can also just go straight through to the other side and secure it down like that, and then go through maybe even to the other suction cup, and therefore sort of securing the whole front part of the structure from maybe flying or rotating backwards. You know, you can never be safe enough, especially when you're around a lot of vehicles. So if you're doing an action sequence where there's a lot of like rough driving, action driving, and accidents do happen. You might have a camera hanging off the side here, like it's actually what we're rigging, and that might catch on something. So, and especially if we have actors or stuntmen, we absolutely want to protect everybody, but the stuntmen are enough danger, and the last thing you want is anything off the camera car falling off. So to be extra cautious, we do want to, once we're finished with our whole structure, then safety strap it down with ratchet straps. And so this is why we built in the ratchet strap slots on all of our suction cups. And so you might be asking, oh, I don't really have a place to anchor down the end of the ratchet strap. And so, or especially if it's a very expensive vehicle and not this old race car, this is where the grip loops or gear loops that you can buy at most adventure stores come into play. You can basically just wrap this around anything inside or around the vehicle and create an attachment point. So this is actually what we're going to do right now, so you can kind of get an idea of how this works. Back here we have a roll bar, which is obviously a great structure to rig to. And so I'm just going to wrap that around there, and that has created a soft attachment point. And so here we go. We go back from there, and now I'm going to run this through there, and then I would run it back, and there we have it. So now we would have a super secure anchoring point that is not going to fly off. You can even slam the camera into something. There could be an accident. You can be drifting and driving really rough, and you don't have to worry about your rigging because it's actually safetied. And yes, so that is why we decided to put these safety straps on here. Of course, you can even anchor them to other locations, but that is an important part. But we're going to wait till the end of our rig. That's the last thing you do, of course, because a lot of times you end up moving things, so you don't want to strap things down and then have to move them again. So that's the safety strap slot. The cheese plate up here, as I might have mentioned already, it's all 1 inch on center spaced. We have through holes and threaded holes. So the reason we did that, it's kind of might seem obvious, but you can attach a lot more than speed rail and baby pins on here. You can buy these at a local hardware store. We'll probably make these available also in our new hardware section on our website, where we're starting to add a lot of things like this that are very useful. And so this is just a eye bolt, and it's 3/8/16 threaded. And so you can thread this in any point on the rigging, and it gives you a anchoring point so that you can, so here's right there, so that you can, run a strap through it or anything to safety. I actually use these a lot if I'm running SDI around the car to sort of organize my cables. And so anyways, it just shows you that you can use these other mounting points for a lot of things. And one of the things I personally use a lot in some of my rigging are some of these eye bolts to organize SDI cables, power cables if you're using a block battery inside the car, things like that. And of course, you can use these as additional rigging points if for example, your ratchet strap maybe won't fit through the slot here. This can give you a really good anchoring point. And the other way to create an anchoring point on the car is to use variations of this device. So this device you can find in a lot of sporting goods stores. This creates an anchoring point that a lot of people use to tie down canoes on top of their cars and stuff. What this does is, if you have a door jamb or the hood jam, you can put this inside and close your door, and then this gives you a soft location that you can rig to and use your ratchet strap. So these are really great. I'm going to see if I can make these available on the website. I'm not sure, in different sizes. This one's quite big. They do make smaller ones, but these are extremely useful, especially when you're working on cars that that you have to be very careful about, and there's not a lot of places you can rig to. these can be very useful. So that pretty much covers the 10-inch suction cup. You know, things to watch out for. Again, just make sure it's always pumped up. When you're done, make sure to strap it down. Keep in mind when you're choosing how to run your speed rail off of the top of the cheese plate. My preferred method is the speed rail starter, mainly because it cannot rotate. It applies a lot of pressure to the tube, and I can vary the length of the tube that's on here. Right now we have a very short 6-inch length that we will also be selling in black anodized on our website. You can use the grenades. Like we mentioned, you can move them around wherever you want. I don't like them because there's only a single bolt. They are quick and easy, and they're fixed length, of course, so you can't vary the length. All right, so we just finished with the 10-inch suction cup, creating our forward mounting point, anchoring point, and now we need to connect our anchoring point to the rear speed rail structure, which will triangulate our whole setup and give us the stiffness we need. And so basically the way we're going to do that is with a piece of speed rail running from here directly to our vertical tubes coming off the 6-inch suction cup that we mounted earlier. So of course, as you know, we are making available black anodized speed rail tubes in varying lengths. This is a 4-foot section. And so, but for the purposes of this video, I'm going to use just a bare piece of speed rail just because it gives us some nice contrast so you can see what's going on. But so to make this connection, we can't use our fixed Houdini clamp because the fixed Houdini clamp, as good as it is, it only works in the 90-degree offset or like a 45-degree offset. And in this situation, it's going to be different every time we rig. So this is why we came up with a 360 swiveling Houdini clamp. And so basically it's a very simple setup. It's 4 pieces that with one bolt, it tightens all the clamps at the same time. And so this allows you to set your angle, and then by using one wrench, you tighten both down. Now, this will provide a very strong, very secure connection with virtually no play. But of course, the tubes can still rotate. So these work great as triangulation tubes because the rotation is not going to come into play, because once you start to triangulate your anchoring points, things can no longer rotate. So as much as you can, whenever there's a 90-degree intersection, you're going to want to use the fixed Houdinis. But, you know, in these kind of situations, this is why we came out with the 360 swiveling Houdini clamp. And there's a couple additional mounting points which are really, that can come in real be really useful. So let's take our piece of speed rail right here. I'm just going to set this down more or less in place. It helps to have someone assisting you. But basically, you're going to want to loosen the bolt so you can loosen it enough so you can get both of the speed rails through the clamps. And so actually let's lay that in there. And so I'm going to want to run this like that. And whoops. All right, so I have it very loose to make my job really easy. So, you know, I'm actually going to mount this as far down as I can, just because it provides less leverage, right? So here we go. I only have to use one bolt. And so I'm going to hold the clamp together like that in position where I want to get it a little bit lower. And so once it's, slightly in position, I'm just going to snug it up. So I don't want to go too tight on it right now because I still have a lot of rigging to do down here. I need to secure the lower part of the speed rail. So actually we want to leave this just slightly, put a little bit of drag on there so it's not flopping around, but we can rig the bottom part. All right, so now that we got the upper mount started, it's not tightened down yet. We need to secure the lower one. And so we're going to take another 360 Houdini, and we are going to, first we need to make sure it's a little bit loose so we can get the tubes in. So we'll just take our Allen wrench here and loosen that guy up. And now that it's loose, we can slide that on. And whoops. And so you can choose to go on either side of the tube. In this case, I do want to stay right here. And so if you leave it loose enough, you should be able to slide. See, I'm just going to make it just a tiny bit looser. There we go. And a little bit more right there. And now we can feed it through. Like I said, I like to leave a little bit on both ends. That gives me room in case I need to move this anchor point around. You know, I have room here and I have room down here in case we need to adjust. And so, okay, I'm going to, I like to do the upper first, the one that's most rigid. So let's see here. So right there, I make sure that the halves are aligned with each other. I'll put it, you know, I'll get it nice and snug. I won't go too crazy on that. So now that I move down here to the lower one, you want to make sure it is aligned in the position it needs to be as far as rotation. And then, you know, so right now, since this isn't triangulated, it's moving back and forth. So what we want to do is sort of like tweak it a little bit so that it's always applying pressure in a certain direction. So right there, I just moved it a little bit, and so it is now in tension. And now I'm going to want to tighten this up a little bit. And there you go. My clamps are nice and aligned with each other. You know, you can verify that right there. And now I'm really going to start to apply a lot more torque to the Allen wrenches. Once you verify that things are more or less where you want them to be, you can go ahead and start to put a lot more torque on the mounting bolts, because since these swivel, you want to apply a lot of pressure. We provided you with a very strong 316 stainless bolt, envisioning that people are going to do what I'm doing there and apply a lot of pressure. So the clamps right now are getting very, very tight. So there you go. It's a really fast clamp since there's just one bolt to tighten both halves together. And now that we have our front anchoring point attached to the back of our structure, you're going to notice it's no longer moving back and forth, and it's definitely a lot more rigid side to side. Now, it's still moving a little bit, as you can see. That's because we need to add more mounting points, anchor points. So, of course, we're going to add one more 10-inch suction cup to the other side of the windshield, and then we're going to run a similar tube just like this. Essentially, we're going to mirror what we did on this side. And then that's when you're going to see we're going to have 4 contact points, 4 anchor points on the vehicle. And that's when you're really going to see the structure really start to become very rigid. It may seem like we're finished because the rig is very strong right now, but you know, I do want to add one more tube right here to give it a direct fore and aft connection instead of an angled. To add this brace, this last fore and aft brace, I'm actually going to use a fixed Houdini down here at a 90-degree angle, and then we're going to use the 360 swiveling Houdini at the top, where I'm using the side mounting ear on the 10-inch suction cup instead of going up here. It gives me a much closer to the mounting point position. And so actually I'm going to start down here with the Houdini clamp and with the fixed Houdini clamp. And so we're actually just going to thread the speed rail tube in there. I'm going to lay that there. And in this situation, we actually have to take the Houdini apart because we can't slide it in from the end. Let's see here, one more. Okay, boom, like that. And I'm gonna lay this right there. All right, so now we're going to want to tighten this lower Houdini mount. So I go a little bit at a time right there. I left the bottom one loose so that we can adjust the top. So now let's take the 360 Houdini swivel and mount it to the top on the side ear of the 10-inch suction cup. And so the way we're going to use this is we are going to get that, slide it onto the tube right there. And then we're just going to drop it in right onto the grenade right there. And I could probably move this tube down. It's getting a little close to the window, but for now this will do. And so of course I left the tightening bolt right here because I wouldn't be able to tighten it if it was down there. And so I'm just going to make sure my clamps are nice and lined up and get that nice and snug. Actually, last thing I want to do is actually loosen it a little bit, push back on the tube to add some tension to it, and then I'm going to tighten it. And then that way this tube is pushing back and then the upper braces are pushing this way. So just keep track of which way you're tensioning things, and that way the whole thing is a little stressed and pushing on the suction cups actually, because you want things pushing the suction cups in, not ripping them off. So now I'm gonna give this a nice tighten right there. And all right, so that pretty much finishes our main rigging of the race car for our shoot. And as you can see, we use quite a few of our new CineMilled vehicle rigging products. And the last thing we need to do is actually rig the camera on the end of the speed rail, where we're going to get this cool 3/4 raking shot of the side of the vehicle as it drives down the racetrack. So, but as you can see here, we are all triangulated. You see a couple of triangles here we got going on. As you can see, the car is extremely, the rigging is extremely stiff. You don't hear any play. There's no play whatsoever. All the clamps are super tight. There's no wiggling or anything like that you find in other clamps. It's super strong, super secure. And as you can see, even though the single 6-inch suction cup was not that, once we first put the tube on there, it kind of moved a little bit. Once we add all the anchoring points and we start to triangulate and tie everything together, it actually starts to transform into a real structure that becomes very stiff and that you can hang cameras off of. So the last step is going to be putting this camera on here, and we're going to turn to our female side of the Houdini clamp because that has lots of rigging points on the back side. So we're just going to take this Manfrotto and we're going to mount the camera. So here we are in the final stretch of our race car rig. And so far we've used the 6-inch suction cups, we've used the 10-inch suction cups, we've used the fixed position Houdini speed rail clamps, we've used the 360 swiveling Houdini speed rail clamps, and we've used a couple of black speed rail tubes that we're now selling. And now is the time to mount the camera in the position we want to get our shot. So to do this, what we need to do is we need to somehow figure out how to mount the camera to an 1.25 inch speed rail. So the easiest way to do that is you take half of a fixed Houdini clamp, which we sell separately, the 2 halves. This is the female side, which we have put a bunch of mounting holes on this side. So what this allows you to do is to slap it on a piece of speed rail and then attach any number of different things to it and do all sorts of cool things. So I just want to talk real quick about what are the different ways we can do this. So here's our GH5, and we got a nice camera cage that goes around it and gives us lots of mounting points around the camera. So basically we have 1/4-20s on this upper cage mount, and so what I've come up with here, and there's lots of ways you can do this, but this is just one of them. I have this little thread converter here, And so I'm going to, actually I'm going to go a little bit further back. I'm going to thread this onto the camera, and then this gives me a 3/8 rigging rod that's threaded on both ends. And so what I can do here is I could then thread this into the Houdini clamp, and then that gives me one rigging position. Now, the downside of doing this is if we pivot the Houdini back and forth, I can adjust the tilt and I can adjust pan, but it's a little tricky. One of the another cool way you can do this is if we slip this off right here, we have a ball head, an adjustable ball head, and it's got a nice beefy 3/8 stud on the bottom of it. And so it gets really simple. We can just take that and thread that in. And we give you plenty of meat. And there you go. And then of course you can tighten that enough to where you feel safe. And then we can slide that onto the tube. And now when we loosen the kip handle here, we have a ball head, which we can totally fine tune the position of the camera. So, but before we do that, and that is the way I'm going to choose to go. I do feel like it gives us the most amount of freedom with framing, which is ultimately what we want to do. We want to tweak the framing until the director and the DP is happy. So ultimately, that's the best option. And having some sort of ball leveling system is the best way to go. For a small camera like the GH5, this sort of still photo tripod ball head works really well. But of course, there are bigger sort of ball leveling heads for vehicle rigs, for bigger cinema cameras. And this is actually probably something that we're going to put together. So keep following our feeds and you'll probably see a lot more cool rigging products down the road. But the other thing, we got a nice piece of speed rail here. You might be asking yourself is, what if I wanted to mount my Ronin or your Movi or any gimbal you have onto this piece of speed rail to get this shot but stabilized? And so we do have now our CineMilled ISO mount, our vibration wire dampener, and you could rig this to the speed rail and then hang your gimbal underneath of it. So normally you can bolt our Mitchell collar and castle nut on here, but if you thread that off, if you take this off, or you can even leave it on, what you're going to have is a 2-inch on center through and threaded bolt holes. And these two mounting points are also 2-inch on center. So you can essentially take the female Houdini and bolt that to the top right here and then just slide that on. And then you're going to have a wire vibration isolator and the gimbal. You can even put a fixed camera on here if you want. Now this is a solution that might work okay. It also lets the camera move a little bit left to right, and that can, when you have some foreground that's relatively close, can give you some horizontal parallax, which I'm not a big fan of. And honestly, if you're shooting the vehicle that you're rigged to, I don't really like the gimbal look. This is probably something we're going to do a video on down the road, because a lot of people, they look at something like this vehicle rig and they're like, oh, put a gimbal on there. You don't always want to stabilize your shots, believe it or not. Just watch movies like The Bourne Identity or, Fast and Furious, and most of those shots will be kind of shaky shots. It imparts a lot of energy and action into the scene. So you actually want a rigid mounted camera if you're shooting the same vehicle that you're rigged to. So, which is what we're doing right now today. So we're not actually going to put any sort of isolator or vibration or gimbal or stabilizer or anything. We want a rigidly mounted camera that's actually going to vibrate and bump and shake when we're sliding the car around and doing a chase scene or something like that. So let's rig this up here. We're just going to take this guy, and like we did a little bit earlier, we're going to thread this guy right onto the top of the camera, Boom, boom, boom. And get that nice and tight. Take our female Houdini, thread that in also. So as you can see, this is all really quick actually. Once you do this once, you should be able to get this down and get this rigged really quickly. You know, so we're gonna tighten here our Houdini. I don't quite know where I want to land with this, so I'm just gonna say this is gonna be a good frame. So if we loosen the ball head, we can now aim the camera more towards where it's going to be pointed at. Probably, let's get a little bit of ground on there. Let's say that's where the DP wants the camera and the director wants the camera, and they're happy with that camera positioning. Of course, we're not just going to leave this on a single mount. We need to triangulate the camera now. Now that we've triangulated the rigging, we've got to triangulate the camera. And so there's lots of ways to do that. One of those ways is by starting off by using the CineMilled baby pins. And so we can thread one into the side of the camera here. Right there. And then we could thread one into the base of the camera. Where is that? There we go. We can get that into the base of the camera. And from there we can use things like 5/8 gobo arm, and then rig up to a position up there. Obviously this would be in the shot. We'd swivel it to the other side, but you get the idea. We can start rigging off to different points on the vehicle so that we are holding the camera from the bottom as well. Same thing goes for the side. We can actually run a brace up this way, for example, and boom, right there. And then we could put another pin, because we have mounting points on these on the corners and the top. We could put a pin right there and then brace from there. And so that's just one way you can use the baby pins. But so for this rig, actually what I'm going to do is I'm not going to rig with 5/8 rod. It's such a small camera. I have a large assortment of 3/8 rigging rods and these mini grip heads, and so that's what we're going to do. I think it fits the situation for the small camera really well. And so we need to pick a third point on the car to sort of, so we can triangulate 1, 2, 3 the camera. And so because I'd want to go as far forward as I can before being in frame with the camera, I know that the frame line's right about here. So this is a good point to make an attachment point. Now, if I just take the rigging rod and I go up to there, obviously I need something right there. And so that something is going to be our 4.5-inch round suction cup. And so, because we have a small area right there, so I'm going to, once again, I'm going to orient the plunger up, and I'm going to push that down until the red line disappears. And I'm always giving them a couple pumps to make sure they're nice and tight. And so now we just gave ourselves another cheese plate area to rig and brace the camera for, so that we can triangulate 1, 2, 3, right? And so now we need to connect this with this. And so we are going to use, I got this little 3/8 rigging rod here that we can thread into. Just got to find a 3/8 16 threaded hole. It's got a lock nut, so we'll lock that down later. So that gives me a post I can rig to. And then on the camera side, we can do the same thing. I got a 3/8 16 rigging post right there. Bam. And then it's got a lock nut also. And so now what we're going to do, we're going to take the mini grip heads And honestly, there's some things about these mini grip heads I don't like, and it's possible that in the future I might come up with my own solution. And there you go. So you're gonna do that right there. I can take this other one right here and then slide that in there. Boom. Bam. I'm gonna tighten that, and then it's a kip handle. Boom. All right, so now we have just triangulated our camera, and we got this cool raking shot. So this made the rig much stiffer. And if they are happy with this, if they like this setup, then the last thing I'll do is I'll run my safety straps on, at least the main rigging points, like the side one and the 10-inch suction cup at the top. The other thing I may want to do is put a safety strap right here onto here. It's just one of those things that, why not? Doesn't hurt. But that's a good example on how you can use the 4.5 inch, because it gets into this tighter area of the body, to give you another bracing and attachment point to the camera. We can, essentially, if you have the time, the stiffer you make the setup, the more rods you run, the better the resulting image is going to be. So I'm actually going to give me one more attachment point right here, and I'm going to look to run another rod up somewhere else. And now, if we wanted, a lot of times, a lot of grips, they swear by, if they don't have to use these thinner rigging rods, that they want to always rig off of speedrail as much as possible, because speedrail is kind of like the gold standard as far as like giving you the most amount of stiffness and everything. So we could absolutely take a female Houdini mount, put it on the bottom of the camera, run a piece of speedrail to here, where we could put a grenade or the speedrail starter and a swiveling clamp, and then actually do this cross brace with speedrail as well. So you have speedrail running to both sides of the camera, and it's a lot stiffer. All right, so we're pretty much done now. As you can see here, the car is pretty much all rigged up. We got our structure nice and stiff. We got the camera framed up. We got it braced from 2 positions. At this point, I would probably say the last thing we would do here is run some safety straps, like I described before. Adding some gear loops, some soft loops onto the hard points, and then run straps. And of course, we're going to do that, but I don't think we need to cover that. That's pretty straightforward. And we only got the camera from 2 points. I could stick a baby pin in here and run extra things. So what I would say is you can rig for hours, and you can always add extra tubes. Like right now, this is really strong, but this tube is coming out right here and it's flexing a little bit. I could see that causing some vibration. So if I had time, if they weren't on top of me, or if I was pre-rigging like I'm doing today, and I do have time, I'm here to make this as the best it can be. I will probably take the time right now to add another starter right here and add an additional tube right here to sort of support the end. And I might have even come off the bottom frame rail and brace it like that. So, I mean, really kind of the sky's the limit, you just have to use your head and see where the weak point is and keep working at it. And then the more rigs you do, the better you'll get at it. I take lots of reference photos so that I can recreate it the next day. In this case, I can load it up on the trailer ready to go like this. But, a lot of cases you can't. So you do your pre-rig the day before, and you take a lot of reference photos, and, so on the day you can get it rigged up as fast as you can. You're going to notice that when the first time you're doing it, it's going to take 3 times as long, because you're kind of figuring things out. Oh, this piece of speed rail is too short. This one's too long. This is moving. And so once it's all done like it is here, I'm going to take a bunch of reference photos and I'll be able to recreate this really quickly. So it takes easily half the time. And so, you know, I hope this video is going to be helpful to you guys on how and where you would use the swiveling clamp versus the fixed Houdini clamp. You know, the 10-inch suction cup, the different ways you can use the 10-inch suction cup, and the 6 we got right there. We got the 4.5-inch right there. And so, you know, and the female Houdini right here. So, you know, there's many different ways you can use all these products. I hope this gives you kind of an overview. And if you're trying to do a similar rig, this gives you a good starting point. You know, every car has a different shape, so every car is a little different. But this gives you a good starting point. I'm hoping I can do more videos like this with different vehicles. You know, SUVs. We're gonna rig up the pickup truck, which is a very common rig also, as well as an SUV. So we're gonna do different rigs, and we're gonna invite other grips also to come out and share some of their knowledge with us in some other future videos. But this is just to get us started, and we have a really good Facebook group that we administer. It's called the Vehicle Rigging and Camera Car group, and there's like over 3,000 users in there, lots of key grips, and everyone's posting pictures of their different rigs, and you can learn a lot. And if you get stuck, if you start to rig your car and you want a second opinion, that's a great place to go. Of course, we got the CineMilled Facebook group. If you have a specific question about our product, you can hit us up in there. And obviously on our YouTube channel, if you like this video and you think you want to subscribe, please do. There's a little bell which is the notification icon. When we get a new product update or a cool new video, you'll get notified, and so you won't miss it. And that's pretty much it. And I hope you enjoyed it, and see you on set.